So I've been asked about this one a few times, and I agree. It's time to dive in. So one of the biggest issues that the legislature was supposed to tackle this year was the idea of school choice. And it is a tightrope to walk, because if we lose our balance on this one, there's a chance we fall back to the bottom of the rankings. We currently have some incredible momentum in our schools, but with the Department of Education potentially going away, with our new way of funding our schools, and with this new bill, we have a lot of chances to screw it up. And our House Education Committee agrees. In fact, they didn't vote to push this thing through. But the head of that committee, Representative Roberson, used a loophole to push it through anyway. He took a voice vote instead of a per-person vote, which allowed him to say that it had passed. So we're already off to a very rocky start with this one, but let's go ahead and dive into what's inside the bill anyway. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this thing almost broke my brain. I mean, the introduction to this bill alone, which is in all caps and single space, took up an entire page. I mean, just look at the size of this thing. Now, they call this a school choice bill, and what this essentially allows is that if there's a student who's in a district that's struggling, say a D or an F rated district, they have the ability or the option to move to a public school in a better district or to a private school. And the parents' tax dollars move with the student. They either go to that new public school or they are used as a reimbursement for private school tuition. The bill also includes a section that's entirely focused on kids who are in the foster care system. It provides them with everything from tuition to technology to tutoring. And at first glance, this bill does seem pretty good, right? I mean, there are a lot of positives that you can see in the way that it's worded. But there are some potential cons that we do have to consider as well. And we have to ask the most important question: who actually benefits the most from this bill passing? Is it the wealthy families in Mississippi, or is it the families that need help the most? Let's break it down. First, the pros. Now, the foster care section of this bill, I really like. I believe that kids in the foster care system need all the help that they can get. There is a potential that this puts an additional strain on our already strained CPS system, but hopefully that's a hurdle we could get past. And I like the idea that a kid in a struggling district could move to a better district, where we're not punishing the child for the problems of the school district. Oh, and before I forget, this bill does not include homeschoolers. You don't get to keep your tax dollars by keeping your kids home. Now on to the problems that I have with this bill. These aren't necessarily game changers, but they are something that have to be considered. First off, they call it school choice, but it's not exactly school choice, because the private schools don't have to accept the people trying to transfer there. Instead, they can cherry pick which students they want and which students they want to turn away, and there's nothing we can do about that. And when thinking about that, consider that Mississippi is a state that still has some segregation academies, so just imagine which students they're going to take and which ones they aren't. Now, the bill does say that the rejected applicants will be reviewed by the Department of Education every year, but they don't have to do anything once they review it. Second, and this is not a knock against private schools at all, but there's a lot of things that public schools are required to give to a student that private schools are not. Transportation is a great example for that, although the bill does allow for some reimbursement for some students' transportation. Some special education requirements and similar accommodations are required in public schools, but they're optional in private schools. Third, the bill pays for that private school tuition by moving funding out of already struggling Mississippi schools. And here's where we get to that momentum issue. Our schools are on fire right now with our test scores, but what happens when we start pulling resources away from the schools that obviously need them the most? The bill literally takes money away from schools that are struggling and gives it to schools that are already doing well. And if the U.S. Department of Education goes away, that resource problem could get worse. Fourth, private schools are not cheap. Schools like JA and Jackson Prep can range around $17,000 a year. Schools like St. Joe and Madison can be closer to $13,000, MRA closer to $12,000. Now, Mississippi currently pays a base rate of about $6,600 per student to public schools. That's down from around $9,000 last year. And that $6,600 can fluctuate according to need. Now, assuming that that entire amount could be applied to a private school tuition, that's not even going to cover half of some of these schools. For families whose only financial option is public school, this program doesn't give them the resources they need to go to private school instead. Most likely what this does is benefit the students that are already in a private school, essentially just giving them a discount on the tuition that they've already been paying. Take a family making the median income here in Mississippi, which is around $29,000. If they went to one of these public schools through this program, they're still likely to be shelling out $600 to $1,000 a month. That adds up to about 20 to 30% of their entire income pre-tax. So once again, the folks most likely to benefit from this program look to be the wealthy families. It's also worthwhile to take some time to see which groups are for and which groups are against this bill. For example, one of the main proponents of the bill is a group called Empower Mississippi, which is largely a conservative group, and they have worked to unseat politicians who were against school choice. It's also worth noting that Empower Mississippi isn't exactly the most diverse group. Every single member of their 15-person team is white, and only one of their 9 board members is black. And that can leave some potential blind spots when you're deciding a policy for a state that's 40% black and for the public school system in that state that's majority black. It's also worth mentioning that the Mississippi Association of Educators, which on the diversity level is the polar opposite of Empower Mississippi, is staunchly against this bill for the reasons that I've shared. So while there are some benefits to this bill, the imbalances in the bill just don't make it worth it to me. Maybe if the bill was just about moving from one public school to another public school, that could eliminate some of the potential abuses. But as written, if it were me on the House floor, I would not be voting to pass this bill. Although, as we saw in the Education Committee, simply voting against it, not enough to stop it.